Okay, welcome back to the Modern Revolution. Thanks for coming back and listening some more. As you know, on our episodes, we don't go through a big exposition telling you why you should listen to somebody. We instead encourage you to listen. And then if you want to learn more about that person, we'll tell you exactly where to find them. And the divine has been good to me, has been bringing me these incredible people to talk to. Today's no different. So today we have Mr. Jared Zeidman. Jared, thanks for making time for us. I appreciate it.
Super pumped about being here. So thank you for having me.
Well, that's generous, and I appreciate that. We like to start, Jared, with sort of an understanding of what problem in the world are you trying to solve? So could you kind of talk a bit about that and explain to us, what are you trying to tackle out there?
I'm going to try to set the table for you because a lot of
Okay.
this has happened over the last 10 years.
Okay. Okay.
Um, so I come from a background where the overwhelming majority of my life has been around the game of basketball, and the
Okay.
overwhelming majority around my adult life has been around college basketball.
Okay.
I've spent 15 years as a college coach, and one of the things I've learned is particularly as technology has evolved and
Hmm.
as social media has evolved, there's been a lot more of a divide
Hmm.
between what colleges are actually expecting, not only from their athletes, but just from their students in general,
Right.
and what high school students are currently getting in their feedback loop, which is largely social media. And unfortunately, it's a flip of a coin whether the social media is going to be giving them accurate information or disinformation.
Okay.
So I am aiming to be a disruptor in the college recruiting space.
Okay.
I am creating resources that explain to high school kids exactly what college coaches are looking for. And I am also showing college recruiting prospects, so, sophomores and juniors in high school and their parents, specific strategies so that they find the correct fits and the correct coaches to
Okay.
uh, affiliate themselves with. So I'm essentially
Okay.
trying to be a dual-sided disruptor
Okay.
in the college recruiting space.
So let's start a little bit, if you don't mind. I'm curious about your attitude about sport because
Yes.
when it comes to sports in general, but the notion of sport, for me, there's a heavy analogy to art in that uh, art and character formation. Um, I've known a lot of coaches in my life that coach various things at various different levels. And the ones that I have resonated with, where particularly when they coached younger athletes, young kids and teens, was mostly about the notion of sport as a tool to become a better person, as character formation. So as so much of your life being tied up with basketball, I'm curious about what role it plays perhaps in your life. And then as somebody who's touched so many lives, and particularly young men, the coach is often like a surrogate father for folks and
Yeah.
becomes this outsized player in somebody's life that they take with them their entire life because that was where they got nourished and that's where they got, attention and all of that. So could we kind of, before we do anything else, like I'm curious what you think about the role of sport in people's lives is.
Your comparison to art is a like 100 out of 10
Okay.
comparison. And
Okay.
I'm very, very big into that because especially when I combat the cool kids on Instagram,
Right.
you do not get better at anything. A
Hmm.
musical instrument, a painting, you do not get better at anything on the art side
Right.
without discipline,
Hmm.
consistency, and practice. And the reference I specifically use with athletes is actually pottery.
Okay. How
You have a
interesting.
vision of
Right.
what your thing is going to look like when you sit down at the clay wheel,
Right.
and you get 5 minutes into being at the clay wheel and you just go, oh, this does not
Right.
match the vision at all. How do we sort of save this? How do we make this better? And there's so much growth
Hmm.
in the discipline that comes with constantly working to just be better than you were
Hmm.
yesterday.
Right.
So to flip that into sports, if you were interviewing me for a job, my number one interview answer when I explain my why is my
Right.
favorite thing to teach is leadership. And
Right.
my favorite place to teach that is the basketball court.
Right.
Basketball for me is an avenue to teach people the skills
Yeah.
that will make them great leaders at the next level. And earlier on in my career, when I was mentoring younger men more often.
Right.
And now in the tail end of my career, when it's more been on the women's side, there's actually been no difference in those teachings. How
Right.
can you be accountable to yourself
Mhm.
and others? How can you be disciplined? How
Right.
can you communicate more effectively? And there's some data that supports it. And what I would say to you is there's no surprise to me that artists and athletes
Right.
get hired at higher rates
That's
and are
interesting. Yeah.
better in
Yeah.
team environments
Right.
because of the soft skills that they learn. So, the problems that I probably will get into later that I want to try to disrupt,
Right.
my motivation to solve those problems is because I have seen time after time the intrinsic benefits that
Yes. Right.
come with being an athlete.
Yeah.
So I think you nailed it.
Well, that's kind, and I'm glad to be on the same page because I think it's a confusing world, sports in terms of like, well, what are we doing here as athletes, and particularly as a young person, you can get distracted, and the pot that comes out correct, and somebody sees doesn't reflect the thousand pots that went wrong, and that's done in private. It's the private grind of constantly taking the small gains and the small setbacks and not giving up that I think produces a character in which other people will follow. So I love the notion of leadership as a primary thing. So in many ways, because this has been, it sounds like a part of your life from the beginning, could you talk a little bit about your ability to separate what was healthy in the experience, and then, you know, at what point did you get enough clarity to understand, like, well, this is what I want to disrupt. This is what's not serving us very well.
It's funny. You opened up a very interesting avenue for me by including the healthy component.
Right.
Um, Part of me discovering what was healthy and what wasn't was
Hmm.
actually me becoming unhealthy myself. So
Okay.
let me talk to you a little bit about a recent journey for me.
Okay.
I feel like I can relate to a lot of athletes going through the recruiting process because my path to where I got as a coach was very unconventional. I
Okay.
have I have worked in literally every capacity of this job, from a
Okay.
graduate intern to a volunteer on a team,
Right.
all the way up to associate head, for where 3 years I was the standing head coach being mentored to, take the next steps professionally,
Right.
moving up to the D1 level, hired to rebuild a program with an outstanding young head coach named Sahar Nusebe, who is just one of my favorite human beings on earth.
Right.
I've seen all of it on that side.
Okay.
And I started to encounter some of the things that, on the backsides, the coaches would just be like, this is really interesting. Why does this recruiter have a handler who calls us and tells us that they're an ideal fit for our program, but there's absolutely no way this handler's ever watched us play? Why are the recruits not taking more initiative
Right.
in their process? Why, when I call them to ask them how things are going, they're only answering with one word responses? Do they not know that they're
Right.
going to be expected to communicate like adults
Right.
upon their arrival here? So I'm sort of having those things and having those footnotes. And then I'm going to share this. I apologize for making this slightly heavy, but it's a huge part of my journey to get here.
I appreciate
Um,
it.
I got COVID really badly in
Okay.
the
Okay.
spring of April 2022. And it was a very interesting journey for me, and the doctors did not know exactly what to do to me because my sort of, as I would describe it, my path to badness was a little bit less conventional. I was
Okay.
completely asymptomatic when I had
Okay.
COVID, aside from a low grade fever. And then about 6 weeks later, I started having a severe inflammatory response in literally every organ in my body.
Oh my gosh.
And that sort of, I started having to sort of examine what was most important to me and what my value system actually was, because it was becoming more and more clear to me that, at least in this juncture of my life,
Right.
I wasn't going to be able to coach full time.
Okay.
Like any coach in the beginning, I was very stubborn and I did not listen to the doctors.
Right.
And it just eventually caught up with me. And it was very clear that I was going to have to take some time away. So
Okay.
that's kind of part one of where I start seeing the clarity, is that I have these background experiences and COVID is going to keep me from working. So even
Okay.
right now, there are actually very, very specific restrictions on what I can do and can't do, both
Okay.
physically and cognitively. So that's
Okay.
piece one.
Okay.
The basketball community, when I announced that I had to publicly step away, I will forever be humbled by how supportive they were.
How
People
cool.
were offering me odd jobs, part-time things. I've literally been doing color commentary for ESPN3 and ESPN Plus broadcasts, which has
How
been
awesome.
amazing.
Yeah.
I've been doing consulting on the coaching side. But the most interesting thing that really helped me shift this focus was some well-placed connections at the high school and AAU level
Okay.
asked me to start mentoring some of their younger kids that didn't have what they felt was the correct guidance to try to get to college.
Okay.
When I say everyone asked me the exact same questions, everyone asked me the exact same questions. And I
Okay.
responded in a way that was very comfortable and normal for me.
Right.
And what I didn't get in the moment, at least, was the things I would respond with was blowing these kids' minds. So, like, for
Okay.
example, I would say, hey, you should be the person sending these emails, and here's what you should be saying, which
Right.
is second nature to me as an adult. But these 16-year-old kids
Yeah.
furiously taking notes. And I'm kind of like, oh, we have a total disconnect. So
Right.
I went from being the college coach that sort of ridiculed them for not getting it to realizing, oh, no
Yeah.
one is teaching them
Right.
it. So I set my goal right there to do it in a different way.
Okay.
I did a bunch of research over last summer, both qualitative and quantitative. I got really compelling data. And what I'm doing right now is I'm, sharing with anyone that's willing to work with me the data and what I think the best practices are to try to get yourself recruited. But the way I'm being a disruptor is I'm not doing it in a concierge style, which
Okay.
means I'm not doing any of it for them. I'm
Okay.
teaching them how to fish
Yes.
so
Yes.
that they can experience those
Okay.
lessons on their own. And because they're experiencing them on their own, they will be more ready upon actually arriving.
Right.
Thankfully, the two people that I piloted through this process
Right.
both got roster spot offers at their dream schools,
Okay.
and they are loving it. They love the process. And, now we're building on that. So I know that was a long winded
No,
answer, but
that's terrific.
that tells you the whole story.
So, but one of the things that interests me about what you said is that, I mean, when you had your perspective shifted, you have a long history behind that. It's not early in this process. It's after many years of your ideas, attitudes, behaviors being super ingrained. And I mean, would you have come to the same point of view if you didn't have such a violent disruption? I mean, I'm curious if the intensity of disruption kind of matched the amount of change that you went through.
The degree to which you have sort of identified the how is, in my opinion, like a masterstroke. um, I'll say it concisely. I don't go on this shift if it's not for me having COVID. And something that I would constantly say to injured players
Right.
is there's more to you than your
Yes.
sport. If
Right.
you make your identity what you do and not how you do it, that's when you experience tougher shortfalls. And I'm so happy that I had those experiences because, to your point, that's what compelled me to sort of coach myself
Right.
through this change. And as soon as I realized that there is an information gap I could help bridge, my circumstances no longer mattered. And it became, how can I do this in my
Yeah.
circumstances? So, to your point, a very interesting thing. The entire process of putting this book together, from the research to the
Right.
final drafts and editing and publishing, 45 minutes a day for 6 months.
Right. Yes.
And we just chipped away at it, and
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
and we got it done. And um I would not have been motivated to do any of that had it not been for the pandemic. And now, based on the feedback I'm hearing now, I've been invited by the Women's Basketball Coaches Association for an hour to give an hour presentation to high school and AAU coaches on the data. I'm doing that in a few weeks. So this is already picking up traction.
Yeah.
And I would have never stumbled upon something that ended up being a hugely needed thing
Yes.
had it
Right.
not been for this negative experience. So I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer in one door closes, the next door opens.
Yeah. And that, in terms of, so many things in life and athletics, one of the things that I like about athletics is the consequences get played out quickly. So it's a feedback loop that you don't get many places in your life, because so often it's the aggregate of bad decisions over a long period of time that then show up in a consequence, as opposed to, athletics, you do something that doesn't match the needs of the moment, consequence immediately shows up. And I want to talk about, the system and kind of what you're uncovering. But before that, I'm curious of the consequences of what you're trying to disrupt. If maybe you could describe the consequences of the inertia of that system going on, like what's the long term, because it probably didn't develop overnight, like it probably, you try and disrupt something that got ingrained over time, and what are the negative things coming out of the status quo?
So let me walk you through what I would describe to you as the Generation Z post Instagram and TikTok cycle of recruiting.
Okay.
Um, for the last decade, the recruiting process has become, and it's nobody's fault, the entire world has shifted this way,
Okay.
more self-indulgent. The
Right.
moment we had cameras panned to the front and the
Yeah.
and the pictures became more about us than about them,
Yeah.
this was sort of an inevitable shift.
Okay.
So what has happened is there's been exponentially more self-promotion and
Right.
exponentially less self-awareness.
Okay.
And with the rules of college campuses the way they were, college coaches, I think, smartly in that moment, it was not smart long term, but it was very smart short term,
Okay.
kind of thought to themselves, we can be honest about our recruiting process, but we can also appeal to this self indulgency. So now
Okay.
all of a sudden on campus visits, some of those qualitative conversations go away, but they get replaced with photo shoots and
Oh, okay.
really, really cool graphics. And now, like a huge part of the recruiting process, which used to be like the good ones,
Right.
100% personal touches,
Right.
have now been like 60% personal touches and 40% let's visualize you in the
Okay.
future here. Let's
Yeah.
put you in jerseys. Let's get you cool graphics. Let's really, really sell you on this.
Right.
Let's talk about where this gets wrong on both sides.
Okay.
Where the coaches messed up, and this is on the fault of some of the college coaches, as the
Okay.
data sort of
Okay.
indicated.
Okay.
Um, where the coaches messed up is they assumed that these young kids had someone in their corner that was actually explaining to them what the
Oh, yeah.
day-to-day lives of college sports was,
Right.
and that is not true.
Okay.
even
Yeah.
even their high school and AAU coaches who help them get there don't always know exactly what it looks like when you're going to get there. So that's piece one.
Okay.
Two is on the kids side.
Mhm.
When you're going through a campus visit, you're just getting bombarded with
Right.
information.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're getting bombarded with information that you can barely hold on to, but then you have a really cool photo shoot and a graphic put in your hand,
Sure.
the thing that you're remembering is the
Oh, yeah,
graphic
yeah,
and the,
yeah, yeah.
and the t-shirt.
Absolutely.
So mutually, we've driven the disconnect. So that's
Okay.
piece one.
Okay.
The problem is that there is a intent versus impact thing that has
Okay.
also just happened in the college world. I do not know how familiar you or your listeners would be to it, so I'm going to try to explain it briefly.
Yeah.
There's this thing in college sports called the transfer portal. And it used to be as a way to disincentivize people from transferring, that if you transferred from one school to another, you had to sit out for a year as
O
penalty
okay.
before you could play in the new place.
Okay.
Several federal level court cases went down and basically took down the NCAA
Wow.
for saying you have all these legal protections
Right.
because you compare your athletes to regular students,
Right.
but regular students get to transfer as much as they want
Okay.
without penalty.
Right.
And the NCAA has been forced
Uh-huh.
to make that change. So now
Okay.
you can transfer as much as you want, regardless of division, without any penalty of sitting out and losing a
Okay.
year.
Okay.
So remember problem number one,
Right.
where coaches sort of acquiesced and made more self indulgent things.
Mhm.
The moment that coaches were able to recruit more
Oh,
transfer
yeah, yeah,
athletes
yeah.
without penalty, they started doing it.
Right.
Last year, 20% of men's
Hmm.
and women's Division I basketball transferred.
So
That
it's almost, they're using certain schools as is there becoming a farm system where you can't, yeah, and that's
Bingo. So it used to
so,
be,
yeah,
yeah,
go
it
ahead.
used to be transferring down, Peter, but now transferring is omnidirectional. So
Right.
if you're a college coach and you can get an already experienced college kid,
Sure.
that's easier than developing the misinformed high school kid.
Right. Right.
That is the sauce, and that's the big problem.
So, I mean, I'm thinking about this in terms of most athletes at the collegiate level are not going to make their living as athletes. So the overwhelming, whatever, right? So the college athletic experience, if it's not aligned with someone like you that's saying this is a way for you to transform yourself into a leader in which you're going to carry this the rest of your life to do all these great things. However, I would imagine that a very disproportionate number of people who enter basketball at the collegiate level have it in their head that I will be a professional athlete. So there's probably a great number of folks that are like, this is where I'm headed. And coach, if you can't see it, well, then you're just the guy that cut Michael Jordan as a sophomore. You just don't know my greatness. I mean, that would be what I would expect.
Yes.
And the confusion of a 17-year-old that is lauded for the previous 10 years for being a great athlete, that thinks, look, everybody's said has helped me indulge in my own self-indulgence because they think I'm whatever. That if you go step onto a college campus and someone shows you, you up on a screen and a jersey with your name on it, that's got to be super hard to expect that kid to tease apart, is this good for me or not? Because it's going to feel so good. So
Right.
as you've stepped into this system of sort of like narcissism or whatever might be like the most crass term, like encourage narcissism, right? We're teaching them to be narcissists in some ways. And you're instead pushing back against that. What's your antidote? Like, what's the thing? Maybe I know you have some ways in which you describe how you approach this. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
So I am trying to develop 4 very specific soft skills in
Okay.
the recruits that work with me.
Right.
And basically the way I frame it is the other people that you're working with are only thinking about your signing day, which is
Right.
when you commit to your college and you have that fun little presser event. And this is at D1 through D3. You sign that piece of paper and that's where you're going. And everyone is so pumped.
Right.
If you stop there, then you're going to show up to college on day one and just be completely shell shocked by the fact that all the expectations of you are elevated and you're not ready for it.
Right.
So, what I'm instead teaching you to do is you're not going to think about your signing day in high school. You're going to think about your senior day in college
Nice.
when you walk off the court
Yeah.
overflowing with emotions because you just made the right decision and you found your
Right.
forever home for 4 years. And you know that you did all the work to help you get to that point.
Right.
In order to do that, I'm asking young people to embrace a mindset that if I approach this process rather than trying to just get recruited, but
Right.
instead to try to best prepare for college as much as possible,
Right.
then I think coaches are going to actually notice me more because I'm doing some things that my peers are not doing.
Okay.
And those 4 specific attributes, having a growth oriented mindset,
Right.
being more engaging and taking more initiative in your process, being self aware and knowing what you actually need to work on, and
Nice.
finally being resilient and ready for the constant flux that,
Yeah.
college really
Yeah.
introduces you to your adult life.
For
Oh
sure.
my God, everything changes all the time, constantly. How do I manage it?
Without a
So,
doubt. Now that's a little bit that's calling a person to be a better version of themselves, which is hard at any point in anybody's life. I mean, unless you have it habituated into yourself of making sure you're watching the trajectory of your own character, of your own life, of your own thoughts. And there are lots of times in which I think all of us can get off track and do get off track and need, but an overlay to that is it's probably complicated by a set of parents who may not have those same 4 qualities engaged in their own life and may attach their own identity to the athlete that their kid is. So does that do you find that you sometimes have to work against the parenting that the kid may come and even be attracted to it, but the parent may be stuck in the way in which it served people in the past. I mean, could you
Well,
tell me a little bit?
Yeah, Peter,
Yeah,
not only do I have to do that, but I would say one of the things that has surprised me the most about this business endeavor is I thought my original like call to action clients were just
right,
going to be parents and players that called me.
right.
And I was wrong. It's
Okay.
actually high school and AAU coaches that have called me and said,
Oh, yeah,
"Hey,
yeah, yeah.
your messaging actually really resonates with me, but some of my parents are really stubborn and they
Yeah,
want the experience of sport. Going back to what we were talking about with growth, they
right.
want it to be more transactional than it is, and they don't realize that it's a process.
Yeah.
So the thing that has been so helpful with the parents
Mhm.
has been the data.
Okay.
And I think that I'm so happy that I got this advice from some mentors. The
Mhm.
thing I really did not want to be as either an author or a consultant
Right.
was a middle-aged white dude in a sport coat holding a basketball pointing on the cover
Right,
of a book.
right, right, right,
So
right.
like it was really important that when parents are hearing from me, I'm not just giving them my opinion. I'm giving them raw
Yeah, yeah,
data from both coaches and from former current or
yeah,
current and former college athletes, excuse me. And that data is showing them, hey, this isn't just a me thing. This isn't just some brash guy with an opinion. You have to do these things and you
right.
have to buy in.
Yeah,
And you might not agree with me, but just know not agreeing with me might inadvertently cost your child a roster spot offer.
right.
And
So, yeah.
that has been a helpful approach.
So success in terms of like the data you're showing them is that this thing that you want to play at the next level of sport is actually you are served better to achieve what you want by accepting this thing that actually, you know, uh, values less the moment that you get access to it and instead values the results at the end of it, which is you know the another way of saying you're going to delay your gratification because if we're not going to just look at the way in the door as the goal, but we're looking at the way out the door into the rest of your life, which is a long lens for anybody, but particularly a kid. And then if you're in any ways at cross purposes with the parent, that but what you said, that when I think about what this must look like in practice, the coach, the high school coach, the AAU coach probably holds a level of trust that if that is the catalyst that says, no, wait a second, you really need to slow down and listen to this person. That is sort of their trusted advisor. You may be a stranger at first, but I mean, is that what goes on? Like, is the coach end up being
That
your
is
advocate? Yeah.
that is exactly it. And it's actually started on social media.
Okay.
I just, and when I say just started on social media,
Okay.
I started putting content out in the end of February,
Right.
and I am getting feedback from college coaches
Right.
and high school and AAU coaches who were complete strangers to me,
Right.
but are sending me DMs and being like, this is exactly it. And also, would you mind talking about like this thing too?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
what I'm sort of learning is there is a powerful thing in sports about being what I would describe as trustworthy adjacent. So
okay,
obviously, the person that's going to have the best relationships with the players and the families is going to be that head coach.
right,
But just because you have those relationships doesn't mean that the players and the parents are going to agree with, and more importantly, buy into everything you're saying. A
right.
lot of the times in sports and maybe even in other communities, you can bring in someone that's trust adjacent. They can say a very similar message, but
Right,
the message is heard differently because you're not the person that they're hearing from every day.
right, 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 right. That's
And
true, yes.
yeah, and I'm trying to be an ally in that space. And actually, my sort of call to actions for high school and AAU coaches is I don't envy you at all.
Yeah, right, right.
Um,
Yeah,
like there is something incredibly liberating about working at the collegiate level. And then like if a parent talks out of turn at the collegiate level, you just don't have to care
yeah,
because you
right, right,
work
yeah, yeah, yeah,
like you work in college.
right,
And this is not like, I am not the manager of a Target dealing with a product that you don't like. We've
right, right,
signed up for
right,
a longitudinal educational endeavor.
right.
Unfortunately, high school and AU coaches do not have that same luxury. So I think
Yeah,
we're mutually effective for one
yeah,
another in that
yeah,
I get to be their ally, but they also could use someone like me that's like,
Yeah.
take it from this guy. He's at the other level. He has the data.
Right. Well, and in an interesting way, although you came to this perspective after many years of not having this perspective, it gave you a greater authority to say what you're saying because you've participated in this at all these different levels and all these different contexts. I mean, you can't come to your perspective with the same gravitas to somebody who's just like these principles make sense. And although the principles they could come to the same ideas just based on, okay, throughout history, these principles have served people very well and you should adopt them. But when you say it, you say it with somebody that has all this experience. And as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about my own kind of journey in this regard, I was a Division III soccer player. And so in the 80s, right? So like a million years ago. And so I'm Division III in the 80s and nobody's coming to watch me. All the girls are watching the other sports and me and my fellow soccer players. And there was a part of me is like, oh man, I wish I could have played at a Division I. And I left that school and went to a Division I school, not to play soccer, but because I couldn't afford the school I was at. And then when I
Sure.
looked at the life of the Division I athletes, I was like, I was really grateful that I wasn't in that system because it dominated those guys' lives back in the 80s. I'm sure it's similar or worse or whatever you want to say, more intense. And my experience as an athlete, as a D3 athlete, was quite wonderful in a sense. My uncle for 25 years was the associate soccer coach at UConn, and
That's
even
great.
even there, I mean, he's like, I'm like, what is it like compared to the basketball players? And he's like, look, that's rarefied air. Says they're like thoroughbreds. If they walk across campus and it rains, somebody runs out, puts a blanket on them, holds an umbrella. They look after them very differently. So anyway, that's a long way of just saying um, it's an interesting way to influence. Well, by the way, why don't we just take a second that you're tell us where to find you on your social media because people are going to hear this and want to find you.
Yeah, sure. So at Jared the coach on social media, that's me everywhere. So Twitter, TikTok, Instagram,
Okay.
at Jared the coach, all one word. And then the upcoming book and my website are the same title. So Nail
Okay.
the
Tell us that.
Recruiting Process
Okay.
or nailtherecruitingprocess.com. Find me
Uh,
anywhere with those things.
okay. Nail the recruiting process. Excellent. And um, when you this strong reaction that you've gotten to the various messages that you've given out there, is there a theme of what resonates most intensely? That like when you do something, you get a stronger reaction when you talk about, and I think if as you describe this framework, it does come out to gear, right? So we've got, and maybe you could just remind people of that. But I'm just curious, like certainly when we measure social media's influence, we get like, well, what do people react to? I'm curious if there's a theme to yours.
Uh yes, and it's funny. My my first piece of quote unquote viral
Yeah, yeah.
content is actually happening like right now.
Okay.
And it's about a soft skill.
Okay.
The biggest surprise I think to most people is they assume that recruiting exists on this uneven quadrant where in one of the quadrants it's talent. And
Okay.
as long as you're talented enough, none of the other things
Okay.
matter.
Right.
And maybe at 8 schools, that's the case.
Right. Right. Right.
um,
Yeah.
but for the rest of society, there's actually other points of the quadrant.
Sure.
There's talent, there's your personal resilience and how you
Right.
respond when things go wrong.
Right.
There's your level of engagement and your energy level. And again, it's your awareness and coachability. So that gear stuff
Right.
and data. I'll give you a couple of specific ones because
Yeah.
they've really floored some of the younger people.
Yeah.
So one of them is that coaches basically view talent as the cover letter
Okay.
and
Uh,
the resume. They're a team is a mixture of different kids. So
Right.
let's just say a coach already has a talented kid that's still working on their soft skills.
Right.
If you're the next person and they call you on the phone and you only hit them with one word responses because you're nervous and you don't really know how to talk to people,
Right.
they'll stop recruiting you.
Yeah.
If they see you on the court and you have a bad attitude or you struggle to take coaching, doesn't
Right.
matter how talented you are, they will stop recruiting you.
Right.
Um, and those things have been, I think, really important and valuable lessons. And thankfully, as those things have picked up more on social media, I have had some other college coaches either retweet the stuff or
Right.
comment on the stuff on Instagram and basically say, this is true. Like
Right.
we
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
we do this.
Yes.
And I of note, I'll give you the stat that has gotten the most attention.
Okay.
So I asked 50 coaches,
Right.
and these 50 coaches is almost a 50-50 split for scholarship level and non-scholarship level. I
Okay.
wanted my D3 people involved. I love D3.
Okay. Okay. Excellent.
And my question to them was, what is the lowest level of talent you will take? And obviously, it's going to differ a little bit at your level, but make it relative to your level.
Right.
What's the lowest level of talent you will take if you knew that this kid was just off the charts attitude and would be a glue kid that helped hold your team together?
Right.
And the average response, both at the scholarship and non scholarship level, was a 5 out of 10.
Wow.
If you want something even more mind blowing, I was fortunate enough to interview and survey more than 20 college coaches that had won their conference and advanced to the NCAA tournament. So, like,
Okay.
really the cream of the crop
Right. Right.
college coaches.
Yeah.
Their response was even lower, of
Interesting.
4.5 out
Okay.
of 10.
Wow.
So, there is a hive minded groupthink
Right.
around culture when
Right.
it comes to college athletics.
Yeah.
And culture is probably the thing that is discussed the least
Yeah. That's
in
interesting.
club and AAU because
Yeah.
it's all about them showcasing their offensive skills. And
Right.
then when they don't have a good offensive game, they panic. And just so you're aware, Peter, because I'm hearing about your soccer experience,
Right.
part of my research included a control group. So 15% of the participants
Hmm.
did not coach basketball because I
Okay.
was just like, okay, these answers are so consistent. I
Yeah.
got to make
Yeah.
sure this
Right.
is not just a basketball thing. The answers across the board about these sorts of cultural things
Yeah.
do not change in any way, regardless of sport.
Yeah, and when I think about being on, like, my uncle might have been recruiting, and I'd be sitting with him, and in many ways, like, he would be when I would be asking him, "What are you looking for?" Whatever. He's like, "Look, these guys don't know the game. Like, we're going to teach them how to play soccer." So I'm actually not. They weren't. He was looking for a whole kind of the things that you're mentioning were even all those years back when he was doing this was very clear, and it struck me that you would think you really know how to play, if you were at 17, and he was saying no. I mean, other than the freak of nature, and he was talking about Division 1 soccer. It was a meaningful thing, but I found that kind of so coachability and resilience and all of those things. I'm a jujitsu athlete is my current, like, sport at the moment, and
Off the charts discipline for that. Yeah.
it's a lovely feedback loop that's immediate and has that pain component. Like, there's just when you don't do it right and your training partner takes advantage of that. It is a very fast, like, oh, don't do that again type of thing. Which, when I think about other sports, like, that component of jujitsu makes it interesting. So, okay, as you social media, it's just a fact of life, and it seems like it's starting to resonate at you. But the the book, I mean, that'll give people a chance to really deeply understand what you're saying, and not in some short. Um, so how are you getting the book out? Because it's not an easy process
Yeah.
publishing, and are you self-publishing? Do you have a publisher? Like, how
Yeah.
are you doing it?
I have elected to self-publish.
Excellent.
And my why is also another sort of disruptor angle.
Okay.
So something that I think about a lot, and I guess this comes with my entire adult life working in higher education in some capacity.
Right.
I have coached people who got an athletic scholarship and did not need it. And I have
Right.
coached people whose athletic scholarship was their sole opportunity
Yes.
to
Yes.
obtain a quality higher education.
Right.
And I believe in the value and development of a higher education.
Right.
So my my sort of thought as I was writing this and kind of visualizing a long-term plan was, how can we sort of attack this in a way where if somebody wanted to work with me, it would
Right.
be profoundly accessible to
Right.
everybody.
Yes.
And self-publishing was by far the
Yes.
option to do that. So to give you an idea, it kind of brings it full circle because I talked about the COVID stuff a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got COVID on April 30th of 2022,
Okay.
and this book is coming out on April 30th of
Okay.
2024. So
All right. All
if you
right.
believe that I still have some of that competitive spirit, Peter, uh, that's the release date.
Yeah. Excellent.
The book,
Excellent.
if you want it as an ebook, you can download it in whatever format you want for $7.
Okay.
If you want it as a regular book, it's $15. And it was
Okay.
critically important to me to
Yeah.
price it in a not prohibitive way.
Yeah.
Similarly, I am trying to drastically undercut some services that I would describe as concierge services.
Yeah.
I
Tell me
am not,
about that.
because I'm not trying to do this whole process for you. I'm
Right.
not going to do your college admissions resume. I'm not going to send the emails for you. So I'm not going to charge you like I am.
Right.
So I'm trying to be more affordable
Yeah.
than my colleagues. And if
Right.
you can't afford me, I'm running a promotion where if you're willing to let me record the session so that we can have the greater basketball community learn from our conversation, then
Right.
your session with me will be free.
Okay.
So my entire lens is built on access,
Yeah.
and I felt like I wouldn't be practicing what I preached if I was going so hard at these kids to do a DIY approach, and
Right.
I didn't also
Yeah.
DIY.
Oh,
So
that's interesting. Yeah. I like it. I like it. And I think, my mom's a poet, and she's a like one of our actual national treasures. She's like one of our great poets of the country right now. And
amazing.
I have watched her have people publish her work and then publish her own work. And um, I think the notion of there being nobody in between you and your audience has a special quality to it, and that it's personal in a way that nobody will try to adjust your message, and nobody will try to find the audience they think you should find. You and your audience will come together in a mutual manner, which I think is really wonderful. Um, well, listen, I'm just so grateful that you spent time with us. I'm somebody that feels like what you're doing is important for the fabric of the culture. That
Yeah.
so many kids come through sports and they get changed in various ways. And if we can change them into ways that make them better leaders and strengthen the fabric of the society, it's a service that all your work will echo in ways that you'll many times probably won't see. So I'm just really grateful for everything you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Peter. And let me give you your flowers really quick because I'm genuinely a fan of your podcast.
That's
And I
generous.
truly believe that if there were more podcasts like yours that were about the how and not just the
Yeah,
what,
yeah,
the world would be a better place. So keep
yeah.
up the awesome work. And I certainly hope this is not the last time we connect.
You can come back whenever you want. I appreciate it. Thank you, Jared, so much. All right. So listen, today, we listened to Jared tell us about ways in which he's affecting the world. They're profound, and they'll likely touch you and yours in ways you won't necessarily know. They started with Jared. And I think that it's a reason to be inspired, and I hope that it's a reason for you to bring your passion to the world and your interest, because the modern revolution needs us all.